around the house. In this video I'm going to show you how to simply hang a number of picture frames like this perfectly level with each other on the wall. So the first mistake that people make with a cheap picture frame is assuming that your hanging bracket on the back is perfectly central with the frame, which more often than not it isn't. So in order to have your picture frame looking central on the wall, you need to find the centre point of the actual frame itself. It doesn't really matter exactly where the bracket is on the back. So in the example I'm doing today, we're going to hang 3 picture frames. So first of all, let's take our 3 frames, then across the top of each frame, use a measuring tape and mark the centre point. In this example, my picture frame is 41.5 centimetres, so my centre point is 20 3/4 centimetres. Then once you've done this, just mark your centre point with a pencil by there. Now do the same for all the frames you're going to hang. The next thing to do is check that the centre line you've marked with your pencil is exactly in line with the centre of your hanging bracket. If it is, then that's great. If it's not, then you're going to need to make adjustments when you hang the frame on the wall, which I'll show you in a minute. The other thing you'll notice with a cheap frame is that the bracket is often set at different heights from the top of the frame. So we're going to need to make some adjustments for that as well, but I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Now we need to mark the positions on the wall where we'd like to hang the picture frames. Now there are several different ways to do this according to the look that you want. In my scenario, I've got 3 frames, I want to hang them all level and I'd like them evenly spaced. I've had to play around with the frames and this is where I'd like it to go, so I want it this distance from the wall. So what I've done is mark a little pencil point on the wall in line with the mark that I put on top of the frame earlier. Now for this next bit we need to get a spirit level, place it on the mark that you've made for the top of your frame. Make sure that that is bang on level. Then place a light pencil mark on the wall, roughly where you think centre is. Now we'll do the same again off that mark and place a mark roughly where we think the last frame is going to go. So we've now got a mark over there which is bang on in line with the top of the first frame. It's also the centre point of the first frame. So what we do now is take a measurement from this end wall to this first point. We then copy that measurement from this end wall and then place a mark at that distance, but place the mark on the line that you drew with your spirit level. You now know that you've got a mark at the centre point and a mark that is level. Now we've marked our points for the 2 end picture frames which are both the same space from the wall. We just now need to find the centre point for the middle frame. And you can do that simply by measuring from one end of the wall to the other and dividing by 2, or measuring between these 2 points and dividing by 2. It's exactly the same thing. So that's 248, so I need to mark a point at 124. And we must remember that all the marks we made on the wall are level, but they're in line with the top of the frame. But we actually hang the frame on one of these teeth by here. So we now need to measure from the top of the frame down to the tooth, and then we need to apply that measurement from the mark that we've made down slightly below. That way when we hang the frame, the top of the frame should come on bang on in line with the mark we've made and the position that we originally wanted it. To make the adjustment from the top of the frame down to the bracket, just take your measuring tape, measure down to the top of the middle tooth. And in this example you can see that's about 8mm, so that's what I need to measure down from the line on my wall. So I'm just going to measure down 8mm. I'm only starting at the 5cm mark so I can get the tape flat on the wall. So there's my 8mm mark. I need to come down from that line there, and that is my new mark. As I mentioned earlier, we've also got to see if this bracket is central to the mark on top of the frame that we made. If it isn't, we need to make adjustments for that as well. So using this frame as an example, that is the pencil mark I made earlier, which is bang on central to the frame. If you actually look at the bracket there, you can see that that is pretty much bang on with the centre tooth. So I'm actually quite happy with that. If this bracket is off centre, then you need to measure the distance from this line out either left or right to the middle of the tooth. Then you would take your measuring tape and measure either to the left or to the right, however far your bracket is out. So let's just say for argument's sake 3mm. We would go to this cross here, 3mm to the right, and we'll put a mark by there. That would now be the new position to drill your hole, and when you put your screw in there and hang your frame, it will hang centrally, even though the bracket on the back isn't central to the frame itself. But as I mentioned, the bracket on my first frame is actually central, so I'll be able to hang that without any adjustment left or right. Now it's up to you whether you go ahead and mark and drill all the holes first, or whether you mark, drill and hang a frame first and then move on to the next one. If you're going to drill all the holes first and hang the frames later, just put a little mark on the back of the frame so you know which hole it corresponds with, because obviously the measurements are specific to that frame. So now I'm going to drill a hole using my 4mm masonry drill bit. I'm then going to use my 6mm masonry drill bit, which is the right size hole for this red wall plug, and then I'm going to use this screw that in, and that will be what hangs the picture frame. The only reason I'm using 2 drill bits is that this is an old Victorian house. The brick is very crumbly when you start to drill it, and by using the small drill bit first, it tends to be a bit more accurate. If you want more information on using wall plugs, you can watch my other video. There'll be a link in the description section below, and a link will pop up on the screen now. And just a little tip when drilling old walls, start off on the normal drill setting. Once you've made a small hole so it's nice and neat, you can then go on to the hammer action. You'll find that a lot more productive. If you use the hammer action straight off, it'll start to bounce around the wall and you might make your hole a bit too big and it won't go exactly where you want it. I'll go back through that with the 6mm drill bit. Place your plug in the wall. Then I'm going to use a hand screwdriver to screw the screw into the wall. Then just leave your screw head sticking slightly proud of the wall to allow the bracket to hook over the back. So there we go, that's one frame on the wall. We'll get the other 2 done now in exactly the same way. I just wanted to show you this quickly, that on my 3rd and final frame I've actually had my first bracket that's slightly off centre. If you look at my centre mark I made earlier there, and you look at that middle tooth, it's 1mm to the side, so I've got to make that adjustment on the wall. And just an important point to note is that if your tooth is 1mm out to the right, when you turn this around, it's going to be 1mm out to the left. So just bear that in mind. When you turn the frame around, right goes to left and left goes to right. Just for info, all 3 frames have been 8mm from the top of the frame down to that tooth. So that's all the frames hung. It's now a good time to get your spirit level, place it across the top of these 2 frames, then place it across the top of the next 2 and so on, and that way you can just check that they're all just about level. If all your frames are hung and level and you're happy, then that's great stuff. But if you've got a few that are slightly out, there's still a few adjustments you can make. If your frame is still slightly out to the left or to the right, you've got a multiple number of teeth. By just moving this across to the next tooth, you can adjust it by a few millimeters, which may help. If you're having trouble with the frame being too high or too low, you can try just driving the screw in or out slightly. By using a countersunk screw like this, by driving the screw in, your frame will slightly lift up onto this bit of the screw, and by driving your screw out, your frame can sit on the lower bit of the screw. Hopefully this tutorial has shown you the easy way to hang a number of picture frames level. For more DIY, how-to, household tips and product review, please watch my other videos and don't forget to subscribe. I've been Pouse Around the House. Ta-ta, farewell.